Hi, and thanks for checking in. As you can see on this screen, the target goal for this video is to be able to find the slope and something that's called the Y-intercept of a linear equation. Now, so far we have spent a lot of time talking about slope. We've talked about slope being represented by the letter m, and we've talked about slope as actually being a ratio or a fraction that compares the rise of your line to the run of the line. And incidentally, we also calculated that to be the change in your y values from one point to another over the change in your x values from one point to another. So again, slope is always represented with the letter m, and for what we've really talked about this unit so far, slope is equal to rise over run. It helps you establish how steep the line is and if it is a positive slope or a negative slope. And just to recap, rise is how far it goes up or down, and run is how far it moves side to side from one point to another. Okay? Then we're going to be introduced to this other idea of something that's called a Y-intercept. Do. Well, real quick, before I get into too much detail, let me just show you what a Y-intercept is. If I have a coordinate plane, disco, just like that, and I have a line like this guy here, right here, where that line crosses through the y-axis, remember y to the sky, that point, that value of y, whatever it is, let's say it's -2. Y would be -2 right there. There's -1, -2. That is called your y-intercept. And it just means where does your line cross through or intercept the y-axis. Because let me tell you, if you know the slope of your line, if you are given that ratio, and someone tells you the y-intercept, you can graph that line. Because the y-intercept is essentially an ordered pair. It's where x is 0, y is -2. And we've already done that. We've already graphed using a point and the slope. So the y-intercept is really simply another point on the line. And specifically what point? The point at which the line crosses the y-axis. I think this will all make sense when you see me do a couple examples. Here they talk a little bit more about intercepts, although I just gave you like a little 1-minute preview. There are two intercepts on most lines. There's the x-intercept and the y-intercept, and it's just like what it sounds like. You can see here on this coordinate plane, they've graphed a blue line, and you see where the blue line is crossing through the y-axis, right here. At that point, that's called the y-intercept. And just for easy counting, let's say that is at a +4. And then they continue the line on down until it crosses the x-axis. That is called the x-intercept. And let's say maybe that is +5. So the ordered pair for these, for the y-intercept, would be 0, 4. And for the x-intercept, over 5 up 0. Okay? Now I'm not going to get too carried away with labeling those ordered pairs, but as long as you understand what intercept means, it means crossing over or passing through. So the x-intercept of a line is the x-coordinate of the point where the line crosses the x-axis. It occurs when y is 0. The y-intercept of a line is the y-coordinate of the point where the line crosses the y-axis, and it occurs when x is 0. Now, just to really confuse you, because sometimes it seems like math does that intentionally. They just throw things at us for really no reason except to confuse you. And I'm sure there's a good reason for this. I just don't really know what it is quite yet. When we talk about the y-intercept, this guy right here, which we're going to talk about way more than the x-intercept, they have a letter of the alphabet that they use to always represent the y-intercept. For example, you guys know that slope is represented by the letter M. Well, the y-intercept is represented by a B. Don't ask me why. I don't know why. I guess I could research it and find out. Maybe you should research it and find out and tell me. How about that? That'd be awesome. So here in a minute, I'm going to show you an equation that has an x in it and a y in it, and an m, which is slope, and then it's going to have this b stuck on the right side of it. And when we see that b, what you really need to start thinking is y-intercept. So over here then, that number, whatever it is, in this case I think we said it was 4, that is going to be b for this line. B is the y-intercept, and that's the point at which it crosses the y-axis. I know it gets confusing. I promise. Baby steps. Remember, baby steps. We're going to spend multiple days on these ideas, so don't get all in a dither. Here we go. This is a linear equation, and linear equations can be written in different forms. There's standard form, there's point slope form, but this is my favorite form. It's called Slope-Intercept Form. Now, the reason it's called Slope-Intercept Form is because the way it's written, we can easily see the slope, which is represented by the letter M, and we can easily see the y-intercept, which is represented by the letter B. So, if this was a real linear equation that had real numbers in it, it would probably look something like this. Your y value is equal to your slope, let's say slope is 1/2, times your x, and then comes your y-intercept. I can tell a lot about this line. I can tell you that it has positive slope, where you would be going up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2. And I can tell you where it crosses through the y-axis. It crosses through the y-axis at a positive 2. That's the y-intercept, otherwise represented by the letter B. Okay? Got all that? Let's see. Where do we go from here? Find the slope and the y-intercept of the graph of the linear equation. Well, you know what? This isn't even graphed. This is just the equation version. So if we're looking at number 1 here, it's written y equals negative 4x minus 2. So I'm looking at this equation right here. That's a nice linear equation. The slope is the number that's attached to the x. Remember, y equals mx, where m is your slope, plus b, where b is your y-intercept. So whatever number is attached to the x in this position right here, that is your slope. So looking then back at our equation, I see a negative 4 attached to the x. That number is your slope. That's your m. Then, as far as the y-intercept, represented by a b in this formula, which is really out here, that is your y-intercept. So the y-intercept is actually a negative 2. So that is where that comes from. Then there's this interesting little note down here at the bottom. Not ultra important. It kind of touches on a previous lesson that we did. It says linear equations can, but do not always have to, pass through the origin. Only proportional relationships are those special types of linear equations in which the y-intercept, or b, is 0. So in other words, proportional relationships, those lines, when you draw them, they have to cross through the origin. But not all linear equations do have to cross through the origin, but if it does, then it's proportional. Okay, let's take a look at some of these. It says, you try these. Let's find the m and the b. Now, remember, the m is the slope, and it's always attached to the x. And the b is the y-intercept, and it's hanging out on the right-hand side, or the right end of the problem. So number 1, y equals 3x minus 7. M is right here. It's just the 3. So you could tell me that the slope was 3, or you could tell me it's 3 over 1. Either one is fine. What do I prefer, truthfully? I prefer 3 over 1. But if you want to just tell me that it's 3, that's fine. Now, what about the b, the y-intercept? The y-intercept is the number that's hanging out on the far right-hand side of the equation. Bang. It's a negative 7. Let's look at number 2. Y equals negative 2/3 x plus 2. The slope is m. It's attached to the x. This is the slope. Negative 2/3. B is the y-intercept. It is the number that's hanging out on the far right-hand side of the problem. In this case, it's a positive 2. I want you to notice the difference between the y-intercept from problem number 1 to problem number 2. Do you see how I put boxes around the negative 7 and I put a box around the positive 2? I really want you to get in the habit of doing that, at least for now. It's important to keep the right sign with the y-intercept. For example, for number 1, if you told me the y-intercept was 7, that's not right. This line does not cross through at a positive 7. It crosses the y-axis at a negative 7. So it's important to remember to grab that negative and put it with that 7. And likewise, down below in number 2, the y-intercept it's a positive 2. And that's important to notate or to remember that there is a difference. So be very mindful of that. What's next? Oh, I see some hidden things. Oh boy. What do I do with this? Oh no. Do you see what's wrong? Somebody's out of place. It's not in the right format. Do you see for number 3 it says y minus 5 equals 3 over 2 times x? Uh-oh. Let me remind you of the correct format. Slope-intercept format looks like this. Y is alone. Then there's the equal sign. Then there's the slope with the x term. And then the y-intercept term, the b, is at the far right-hand side. Guess what? You're going to have to do some rearranging. Sometimes these linear equations aren't arranged the right way, and you're going to have to practice your skills of moving things from one side of an equation to the other. So for number 3, I'm looking at that guy, and I like where the y is, and I like where the 3 over 2 times x is, but it's this guy right here. He is on the wrong side of the equation. He needs to bounce over to the other side. You should remember, goodness knows we've done this 1,000 times, how do you move a term from one side of an equation to the other? We do the opposite. So what is the opposite of minus 5? It's to add 5. Right? So I'm going to rewrite it in blue. My new equation in slope-intercept form looks like this. Oh, yippee. Now it's in slope-intercept form. Now I can easily see the slope is 3 over 2, and I can easily see the y-intercept is positive 5. See how once you get everything in the right spot, they almost kind of jump out at you. Well, maybe they don't jump out at you quite yet, but they will once you practice with them, I promise. Oh boy. Number 4. Same issue. That minus 1 is on the wrong side of the equation. Oh boy. He needs to move over there. How do you move it? You do the opposite. You add 1. So the new format, Y is alone, that's what we want. There's my negative 1/4 x. He's right where we run him. And now I don't have a minus 1 because I moved it to the other side. Now it's a plus 1. So the slope of this line, bang, right there, negative 1/4. And the y-intercept, bang, right there, is a positive 1. Amazing. You're coming along just fine, learning all sorts of wonderful things about algebra. I'm very proud of you, and I think you're doing a nice job so far. Don't give up, and remember, baby steps. I'll see you in class.